Welcome to defining a cloud adoption journey to deliver cloud-native services. My name is Ben Thurgood. I'm a Principal Solutions Architect with the Public Sector team based in Sydney. And I'll be welcoming to the stage soon Michael Cracroft, who's the Chief Security and Technology Officer for Service New South Wales. Now, it's my job to give you a little bit of an intro about migrations in general and talk about how much we've learned about the migration process and how much easier it is today than it's ever been. It's never been a better time to migrate onto the AWS platform. And then my even more important job is to get off stage as quickly as possible so you can listen to a really powerful and interesting story by one of our customers. So just briefly, the first thing I'll talk about is common migration drivers. What's most interesting about this is that it starts often with cost reduction or data consolidation or either machinery of government or other acquisition drivers that move us towards a cloud migration. But what our customers find, and sometimes pleasantly surprised by, are the other benefits that you often tap into. And that can be things like agility and productivity of your organization as a result of the kind of capabilities that you get on the cloud. And also, innovation. There's been lots of examples of customers that have moved into the cloud, and I know many customers myself have moved into the cloud and then have been pleasantly surprised by the fact that their organization's suddenly now able to tap into innovation and have become quite innovative, even when they weren't considering themselves as an innovative organization to begin with. Again, because of these capabilities that you can tap into, things like analytics and machine learning that become on a table as a result of a migration. So a typical migration journey looks something like this. Often organizations will dabble in a few projects. Once they get serious, they normally need to create a foundation capability. They start a migration, and at the same time as building some cloud-native capabilities, they're migrating their technical debt onto the cloud. There's a range of different issues you come onto with that, and I'll go through some of those. But the key thing is value increases the more you move, and this reinvention stage becomes possible. Now, these are just some examples from a real customer migration of the kind of benefits that you can expect to see from a cloud migration. So things like cost in terms of both cost avoidance, so total cost of ownership, as well as operational costs, reduction, but also things like operational resilience and workforce productivity and business agility. So in terms of executing a cloud migration journey, we have lots of ways to help you. You can work with AWS or a partner to do what's called a migration readiness assessment. And this is where we do a survey or a questionnaire with you in a workshop to determine the risk factors, strengths, weaknesses, and issues that we need to make sure we take into consideration for your migration. We get into the readiness and planning, and we take a really deep look at the portfolio of services that you currently have and start to put a migration strategy together. And we typically find the best way to do this is to approach it in waves. So 10 to 20 applications at a time. The initial step is to build that landing zone. We know that all of the basic capabilities are there in terms of security and guardrails to make sure that our move to the cloud is safe and secure. Now, we typically find that doing it in a sprint by sprint process means that you can actually build on the learnings as you go. And whilst I've got these boxes covering sort of the first wave, these pieces are going to continue throughout your journey on the cloud. So things like building a center of excellence, the operational model that you're going to use to operate your cloud capability once you get there, obviously security and compliance policy, and then the migration planning. Now, there's a range of AWS services you can take advantage of. I'll just call out a few that are particularly helpful for the migration capability. So one is the Migration Hub, where you sort of your sort of control center for migration. And from there, you can do things like application discovery, you can do things like migration of applications automatically using the services we provide, the migration service, and database migration as well. So once your initial wave has happened, you're actually operating in the cloud. And then you'll continue to do waves of migration based on your strategic plan, which comes from, as I said, that deep analysis of your application portfolio and a determination of different strategies for different applications. In terms of some applications you may want to retire, some applications that may need to be retained and can't be moved to the cloud for whatever reason, and then rehosting, replatforming, repurchasing, and refactoring. And that's going to drive our strategy. So, it's with great pleasure that I introduce you to one of our customers who's done this for real. And now you get to hear about his learnings and his team's learnings. Can I introduce you to Michael Cracroft, who's a Chief Security and Technology Officer for Service New South Wales.
Thank you. Cheers. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Magic. It's a big commitment to come to these events, and I myself have been to a number of them over the last couple of years. I always found it very interesting and inspiring to hear other people talk about the journeys that they'd gone on through and the experiences that they'd had. So I hope that what I present today is of value to you, and I thank you for your attendance. So what I'm going to tell you about is how a Department of Industry, we took 6 legacy New South Wales government data centres and shut them down and transitioned the majority, 90% of the production workloads and non-production workloads into AWS Cloud in 18 months. We had some key objectives for this, what we dubbed as a mission Improbable. Unfortunately, when you're undertaking a transformation or a migration of this scale, the world doesn't stop spinning. And so it's fundamental that you've got to be able to keep the lights on and do the migration while sympathetic to the needs of the business. And so we had to do that transformation with minimal business disruption throughout. We took the opportunity to leverage the platform capabilities to improve our resilience, our performance, and our security. And although it's fairly commonplace to hear these terms now, when we undertook this migration, the idea of increased security in the cloud was a little bit radical, and it took a lot of convincing to a lot of people that actually getting into the cloud was going to be more secure than the facilities we could maintain ourselves. And as an example, one of our core data centers, there were 2 swipe card doors between the outside of the building and the primary data center. So if you talk about real-world security, what we can achieve in the cloud was significantly better, and that was something I advocated for very early on. We also have a need, a Department of Industry, to improve our machinery of government capability at the time. We would regularly have agencies joining and exiting from the cluster. And what would happen often was it was a significant resource drain for us to onboard these agencies into the environment, where we would be struggling to find rack space or storage space. There's the whole implications of lifting and shifting hardware and so on. So we looked to optimize that capability. And then finally, we really wanted to empower and enable our internal staff. And I can't stress the value of that enough, because our journey doesn't end with getting into the cloud. The challenge for us was actually how do we maintain the organization's infrastructure once we're in the cloud and maintain that operational excellence. And so bringing our team on that journey was a key capability build to allow them to maintain and excel in the future. Although it's me on here on the stage, if you call it that today, I was fortunate enough to lead a very, very passionate and very determined team. Very pleased that there's a couple of the guys in the audience today, so if you get a chance to say hello afterwards, please do. I'll tell you a little bit about the New South Wales Department of Industry. It's a very diverse agency and a complex environment whose purpose is to create conditions for New South Wales to prosper. It's made up of lots of sub-agencies, notably the Department of Primary Industries, Crown Lands and Water, Liquor Gaming New South Wales, Biosecurity and Food Safety Authority, and Destination New South Wales, to name a few. The significance of that is that some of our customers will be tagging great white sharks in the back of a boat, and others will be managing drought relief plans for regional farmers, and then other customers are planning the next Vivid. So there's a huge diversity of applications and business needs that we had to consider. The organisation has over 6,000 staff spread across more than 200 regional locations, and we had over 500 hosted business applications at last count. So the challenge we were faced with was a quintessential burning platform. The facilities that we had were hosted on-premise data centers located in regional locations. And while that's in principle a very admirable notion, the challenge of repairing hardware or getting hardware shipped out and swapped out in a regional location is really problematic at times, particularly when things are time sensitive. We had a complex and high-risk environment due to the nature of a lot of the machinery of government transitions that we'd been through, where you could easily have one rack containing hardware from 5 different agencies, and we had an uncomfortable amount of environmental risks and pressures at the time. Things like power, cooling, storage, you name it, we had it, basically. Some of the hardware that we took out, and there's a nice example here of Ron's terminal there, was actually predating the mobile phone. So if you think about legacy, we had it, I can assure you. We also had instances where we would have people taking shifts overnight to sleep next to the generator so they could top up the diesel to make sure that we could keep the environment cool. So joking aside, it was a challenging environment, to say the least, to maintain. Of course, while we were doing this, our customer expectations were always for secure, always on government. There was a driver for ever more performance and speed and capacity from the organisation. And also, New South Wales Department of Industry is home to some really innovative and progressive thinking people, a lot of research, a lot of science community in the department. And so they were pushing for digital innovation. They wanted to do drought monitoring across the state, or IoT shark tracking, or whatever it may be. And it's a real challenge to address some of those needs of an organization if you're worried about whether the data center is going to catch fire. So why did we choose cloud? The fundamental foundation for us was about stability and about managing that infrastructure layer and that ability to uplift our hardware. And obviously when you're moving into the cloud, you're replacing legacy kit with effectively very contemporary, potentially state-of-the-art platforms to sit your infrastructure upon. Then there's a resilience capability. So we wanted to create this 24/7 government, so we could have that confidence that when we had an issue, that it wasn't going to take down our core systems. Security, as I say, a key thing that we took advantage of was the ability to segment the environment. And rather than having 5 organizations sharing one physical rack, what we were able to do is actually compartmentalize different agencies into different virtual environments, which allows for a segmentation of the blast radius implications, should there be any incident. And obviously I'll come to machinery of government shortly. And also, we enabled ubiquitous audit trail. Some things that are a real challenge in on-prem, we found quite easy to do in cloud. And obviously there's the physical security benefits. So scale and performance, machinery of government again. When an organization is to be moved into the agency, it's often time sensitive, it's politically mandated, and it has to be done within a certain time frame. So we needed the ability to scale to support those initiatives. We were also looking to take advantage of automation and efficiency gains as a course of that migration. And ultimately, a little like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, at the top of that stack is innovation. And to be honest, it's very difficult to, as I say, think about innovation if you're struggling to keep the lights on. And so this is really trying to align with the Digital New South Wales agenda. So we broke the transition down into 3 phases, and that was very intentional. And it was so that we could actually deal with issues that we were facing at the time and achieve a significant improvement before moving on to the next phase. The first part is the terminology Ben used is of a landing zone. We took time to really think about the account structure, the logical, financial, and administrative controls that we would wrap around Amazon accounts. And then we also invested time to build out our virtual private cloud architecture, that template that describes the environment into which we'll be putting our applications and systems. We had to upgrade and improve our network capability because we wanted a high-speed, redundant connection between our environment and the cloud where we were migrating the services to. And although we had resilient architecture on-prem, we were prone to the issue that a physical outage in one location would cause a successful failover of the internet traffic, but then that traffic would swamp the other data centers. And so we actually took advantage of using Direct Connect, and we routed all of our agencies' internet traffic out through our Amazon environment, which gave us full resilience and full scale with internet services, excuse me. And then we chose to build and transition our core services. So when I talk about core services, I'm talking about infrastructure services, Active Directory, database, email and message routing, proxy services and reverse proxy services, things like that. And because we were doing a build of these core services, it allowed us in some cases to retire some technical debt and also to uplift and improve. And so when we positioned our Active Directory, for example, into the environment, we split Active Directory controllers across the 3 availability zones, which gave us that high degree of reliability and redundancy. And it also allowed us to upgrade our AD at the time. It was interesting, last night someone asked me, was AD the last thing that you moved? And I actually said, no, it was the first, because we needed that reliability, that confidence. It's actually the last thing we switched off, but it's the first thing we set up, if that makes sense. In phase 2 of the migration, we had this capability now where our core infrastructure, the things that all of our applications depended upon, was highly available and accessible within the cloud. So then we started to migrate our application data and our server images. And we used some services to take virtual snapshots and copy them into the cloud, and database replication through transaction log shipping. The applications that we were dealing with, in some cases, were very old and legacy. So it may have been installed by someone who left the organization 5 years prior. So although the documentation that obviously is maintained in the environment is kept to a high degree of quality, it's still very difficult to assure that it mirrors the environment as built in the state it was when we moved it. And we also developed some test scripts so that we could measure the success of the migrations by comparing the before and after metrics, which I'll come to in a second. Finally, we had a process of refining and evaluating, a little like those waves Ben was describing earlier. So each time we moved applications, we would reevaluate the sprint process that we went through. And we were able to accelerate that process. And by the end of the migration, the team were able to successfully migrate 25 applications per week with no disruption. And then the third phase, quite intentionally, was then to focus on cost optimization, building out our reference architecture, and refining, if you like, the definition of what good looked like in our new platform. So it was very important to focus on not just what we moved in, but also what we wanted the future to start look like. And we took some advice around what that reference architecture patterns could look like. And then we started to build out and automate some of that deployment. So we had that recipe, that description of a system that we could then repeatedly deploy consistently thereafter. We also took, wherever possible, the opportunity to leverage serverless or platform services. And a simple example to think about is, for example, Route 53 for DNS, very reliable, very cheap capability, or CloudTrail as a replacement for our traditional syslog service. So it was really important for us to manage the outcome. There is a lot that could have gone wrong in the course of the transition. And to address that, the actual nurturing of the process itself was very important and is not something to be overlooked. So we worked very hard to build trust with the business and also within IT. And it's, thinking of the time then, there was a lot of resistance, even in the IT department, to what we were talking about doing, To gain confidence, to build assurance around our landing zone architecture, we engaged professional services so that we had a high degree of confidence and we could hand on our heart say that the environment was secure as per our requirements and that architecture was sound and was validated. We also had to listen to the needs of our customers throughout the transition. When you're talking about a transition that's taking place over 18 months, there's a lot that can change in that time. Agencies need to be onboarded. We would have to, at times, a little like the building blocks in the diagram here, take certain batches of work that we were planning to do and reorganize them because our customers may have a ministerial announcement and they didn't want us to touch a certain system, or there may be a report or a batch process that was necessary. And so we were able to restructure our sprints to take advantage of an agile approach to sort of meet our customers' expectations. From a contingency planning perspective, we took a systematic approach to connectivity and performance testing. And our migration predated some of the tools that are available today. But what we did, a simple example was we would take an application server's IP address and we would just perform a series of lookups against common infrastructure services. So mail, relay, access control lists, firewall, NAT control lists, reverse proxy configuration files. And anywhere that IP address matched, we knew there was a dependency that was fundamental to the way the application worked. And that allowed us to validate both before and after that those connectivities were assured, and also allowed us to document and, if necessary, roll back and re-establish the things that the way they were before we lifted it up. From a performance testing perspective, we also wrote a number of scripts that we would run before and after each migration that validated the state of the services on the boxes, made a number of connections and performance checks to various services. So we could actually demonstrably prove that the applications we migrated were performing as good, if not better, after the migration than when we picked them up. It was also interesting to note that because we had that data, we could actually verify that in many cases, the applications were performing significantly faster as a result of capturing that. And something to think about, and I would impress upon you if you're doing this translation, is to think about capturing metrics along the journey that will allow you to articulate, not just for a slideshow, but with your customers. What does this mean? How is it better? How have we helped your business? We also had that routine process of post-sprint review and made adjustments along the way. And all ideas were welcome. So many times the team would say, why are we doing this? There's no value add in this process. And we'd be like, fine, cut it out. Let's get things moving faster and move on. So just a quick comment on the agile approach. The team that we were working with was very diverse geographically. So we had members in Sydney, in Armidale, in Dubbo, in all over the state. And so we used online tools to perform a sort of digital Kanban where a physical stand-up wasn't possible. And so we would do a sprint plan. We would work out what we were going to tackle, and then we would put it through this process of moving work from left to right, from a backlog of things to do to work in progress. And then thing to call out here is we had a today column in our flow, and that was because we were having daily or sometimes twice daily stand-ups. So on any given day, we all understood what the whole team was working on and what our objectives was. And then the roadblocks capability allowed us, if anyone was blocked from doing something, by moving that card into that column, it actually sent a message out through our chat services to the team and allowed us to identify and, as a group, move to respond to those issues, which allowed us to clear issues more quickly and then move on. If you have a change window to move 25 apps between 8 p.m. Friday and whatever it is, 12 p.m. Sunday, you can't afford to lose a day because something's not approved or someone's got an issue that can be easily remediated. So when we talk about moving from the state we were in to where we got to through automation, initially when we built our environments, it would take us about 4 weeks to provision an account and a VPC manually through the console. By the time we defined that reference architecture and built out a CI/CD pipeline that allowed us to deploy that from code, we could effectively deploy 3 data centers to our specifications within 20 minutes. The significance of deploying those data centers so rapidly is that it's no longer a blocker to taking advantage of all the benefits that come with that virtual data center capability. So what we would do is provision specific customer accounts for each customer. And then we could also, within their environment, provision multiple environments to separate their production and non-production workloads out so that we could segment DPI from lands and water and their production from their non-production. So when you go back to that image of 5 agencies sharing one rack, suddenly we have a lot of capability to segment and compartmentalize. And from a machinery of government perspective, that means that we can onboard much more cleanly and offboard in a very simple way. So we could do onboarding. We established a managed cloud services program effectively within the organization where we could take care of most of the heavy lifting of getting people onto the cloud and taking advantage of those cloud services. So we could do cost management, automation, power management, backup and recovery, enable ubiquitous logging throughout, and really take all the pain out of doing that and manage it in a very effective way. So as part of the transition to the cloud, we didn't just want to get into the cloud. We also wanted to think about what was our future and how best to manage the workloads that we were putting into the cloud. So the analogy here is of a ascent up Everest. And over on the far left there, you can see that's our legacy data centers, which I sort of refer to as sea level, if you like. And we went from left to right. We effectively went to cloud hosting, which gave us that resilient, stable infrastructure. And then we would move applications, depending on the workload and depending on the business impact and the risk, up this maturity curve, which effectively moves us from stability through resilience, security, scale and performance, and so on. And so each base camp, like on the real Everest, you can't get to base camp 2 unless you've made it to base camp 1. And this is a very simple way of defining that application architecture rethink that's necessary if you want to really start to enable some of these transformation capabilities as you move up the maturity curve. I discovered that this analogy was somewhat successful when our customer service director confidently in a big group of people referred to his ITSM platform as being Basecamp 2, and he was really proud of it. This was a non-technical person. Obviously, at the top of the stack there, you can see we place SaaS, sort of highest of all, where we literally remove ourselves from the heavy lifting of managing a system. But then down from that, serverless architecture is really our gold standard for where we want to get to. And we have a number of workloads in the environment where we've deployed whole serverless capabilities for data capture and analysis, for example, in a matter of weeks with almost no operating overhead whatsoever. So thinking about that maturity curve, what it allows us to start doing is then de-risking our deployments in the future. So by building out a reference architecture and a definition of what systems should look like, what good looks like, if you will, it allows us to then deploy systems against that specified architecture, which in turn allows us to measure and assess that the deployments that we have are compliant with the reference architecture that we set out to achieve. And the benefit that we get there is that it creates a virtuous cycle or a feedback loop that allows us to continually improve the deployments that we have. We can also validate that the requirements are being met, and we can, through much smaller incremental improvements, move much faster to uplift services. And this doesn't have to be about application development. This is as relevant to the architecture that manages the infrastructure itself. Yeah. So, obviously, you don't undertake a program like this without learning something, and hopefully some of our experience will be of benefit to you. So the first thing to consider was that executive support and leadership was crucial. When you're approaching a business, a part of the business and organization, and you're suggesting that we're going to take your critical systems and move them from A to B, they need to have confidence, and you need to have confidence that you've got that air cover from your executive to help with that. And that leadership is vital, I believe. Also, it's really important not to underestimate the commercial learning curve. Your whole team is going to go through a technical learning curve, and there'll be a process learning curve and an operations learning curve, but the commercial learning curve is vitally important, and it really is beneficial to get your finance team, your procurement team engaged early and start to talk about what the ramifications of this transformation mean, because it's very difficult in government particularly for them to reconcile the idea of buying a piece of tin and running it for 5 years, as opposed to I'm going to use something for 15 minutes to try something out. It's very different. There is a trade-off we discovered between speed and getting things right the first time. And when you're thinking about trying to move fast and burning platforms, it's tempting to move as fast as you can. But the learning that I'll point out is that if you trip along the way, it makes subsequent migrations that much harder to conduct, because you start to lose confidence of the people in the business who rely on you. So that's why I would argue that quality equals speed, and actually getting things right and focusing on that quality engenders confidence within the team and also within the business, and that's really powerful to move fast. And finally, big lesson, doing impossible is just doing lots of achievable things back to back with great people and lots of determination, and breaking down that big transformation into manageable chunks and collaborating makes really improbable things very achievable. Now, I won't go into detail on this. This is just an example of some of the principles that we developed while we were undertaking the transformation. And that's because it was as important to think about the culture and the philosophy of how we would approach the problem solving and the transition and the change. That was as important as thinking about the technology and the backups and the rollbacks and all the rest of it. So we drafted these principles really about how do we make good decisions, how do we look after each other, how do we validate that we're on track. And I would encourage you, if you're undertaking a similar activity, to consider thinking about what principles are valid for your team to help support that transition. So in terms of benefits, the list would be too long for me to complete all of them, but Department of Industry is able to support customers to deliver to deliver value to the community through robust, agile, and flexible services. There is a compound interest of cloud capability. So fault resolution is faster than ever. There is an increased capacity to manage scale. Because of that, the operations team have more time, which means that they can spend more of their attention on incremental improvement processes. And finally, the machinery of government transitions that we set out to optimize are now faster and more reliable than ever. So when an agency is now onboarded into the New South Wales Department of Industry, they are onboarded to cloud by default. Just to put that in perspective, Department of Industry can now take an agency that's brought into the cluster and transition to the cloud in a matter of weeks. There's a significant reduction in major and critical outages, and we've had 0 in the cloud platform transition itself. The team, I'm very pleased and proud to point out, is also now an established cloud center of excellence. 75% are certified, and I believe they're aiming for 100% within the year. And in government, I think certification is a bit of a dirty word sometimes. People question whether we should be sending people or paying for people to do training and certification. But when you think about this team is managing the systems for diverse organization that are doing some fantastic and really important work, having that assurance and that confidence in your people and having them feel confident themselves is really powerful. It's also worth thinking about when we first talked about going cloud and when we developed our strategy, there was a lot of unrest, as you can imagine, because people were concerned that they would lose their jobs, that they would be out of work, that they would be replaced by robots or what have you. And I think it's safe to say the team now is more capable, more current in their skills, and more employable than ever, and also more engaged. So the journey so far for industry, the transition to cloud took a fairly traditional approach, I think, as you would sort of put it now. So there was an evaluation exercise, a proof of concept was done, then established the DR capability by replicating core data into the cloud. The shared service platform was built, and the core infrastructure was transitioned, as I said. And then the business applications were migrated. And in the course of the 18 months, we migrated over 900 application servers to cloud. We transitioned 850 customer databases and moved 830 terabytes of data into the cloud. The team has now established what I dub, it's a bit of a mouthful, but onboarding, automation, and governance as a service. So as I say, that process of onboarding is no longer a huge resource drain, it's now just a part of the job. I was delighted to hear that they've recently just transitioned Office of Sport into the department in 20 days. 20 days, Kamal? Yep. 20 days. Whole of Office of Sport into the cloud. It's remarkable. Now, that's getting into the cloud, and that's great. That's a significant achievement in my mind, what was achieved. But going forward, looking forward, what the team have done is established a platform for innovation. So when you think about a journey that we went through and some of the challenges we had initially, what we're looking at now is having a capability to support the innovation that the department's looking for. That's data and analytics, that's machine learning experimentation, that's getting insights from data, looking at IoT capabilities. All of that's possible now because that platform's been built. That's all from me. Thank you very much for listening.
Great job, mate. What a fantastic story. Michael's one of the most humble and professional people I've ever worked with, and it's been an absolute privilege to work with you. I know the rest of the AWS account team, Andy Ray, who was responsible for a lot of the work to actually get that capability up and started, have been really proud to work with you guys and the extended team, Kamal as well. So, last messages for the day. Michael and the team, as well as Andy, will join us at the AWS booth after this during the break. So if you've got any questions you'd like to follow up with or meet some of the team and find out what happened behind the scenes, please come and talk to us there. My last couple of messages would be, ask your AWS account team about migration readiness assessments. The professional services that Michael was referring to was AWS Professional Services, and they can help you by conducting a migration readiness assessment. Also, initiate application discovery and a business case. We can help you with that, and we also have partners with migration competencies that can also help you with this as well. So please ask us for help. Thanks very much for your attention today, and please fill out the evaluations before you leave.